On today's show, the Cavs are in a rough patch. That does not mean it's time to change expectations for this team. Plus, are they comfortable paying the luxury tax with this group? We'll talk about all that and so much more on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like 92.3 The Fan, my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today, making it your first listen every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Also need to let you know that Locked On Cavs now has a newsletter, introducing the Locked On Cavs daily newsletter. It is your one-stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. So the Cavs have hit a rough patch. They're 4-5 in their last 9 games. You might have heard they're not playing the best basketball they've played all season right now. They are a team to me that looks tired. They're a team to me that looks ready for the All-Star break, and I will be touching upon what the schedule looks like between now and the All-Star break coming up a little bit later on in this show. But I also think that it's easy to overreact to the first real rough patch of the season. Not to say that the Cavs have played their best basketball in all of the games that they've won, because they haven't. And I think that there are even some games they've won in this recent stretch where you look at it and say, oh, you know what? I don't know that that was necessarily a championship level performance. And you'd be right about that, because that's not who the Cavs have been for a few weeks, really, since they beat Oklahoma City. The Cavs have not played great. They're 4-5 in the 9 games since then. They've been really bad defensively. Still have been an elite offensive team, but they haven't been a championship level team, because to do that, you have to get it done on both ends of the floor. Now, does this mean that it's time to change expectations for the Cavs because they're going through a rough patch? Absolutely not. This is still a team, in my opinion, that is capable of winning the NBA Finals in June. They are too good offensively, and I think they have too much talent defensively for that to not be true. Just because they go through a rough patch doesn't mean that everything that happened before this rough patch was a mirage. Those games all still count. We don't forget what the Cavs have shown to be capable of. I think they will show what they're capable of again. And if the team is going to struggle at some point, because very few teams in the history of the NBA go through an entire season without hitting a rough patch, right? I mean, the Boston Celtics, they're going through a very similar thing that the Cavs are going through right now. It would not surprise me that at some point Oklahoma City goes through a bit of a rough patch, because that's how the NBA works. It's a long season, and these things happen. It's not the end of the world. Now, what should expectations for the Cavs be? Because if we're going to talk about, well, should expectations change? I think we should probably circle back and talk about a baseline of what they should be. I think for the regular season, which expectations, of course, are different in the regular season than the postseason, I think it's silly to put a like, it is a success if the Cavs win X number of games. It is not a success if they don't reach that mark. Like, I just think that when the team is this good, there's not a number that you look at and say, yeah, they need to win that amount of games for it to be successful. What I think they need to do is they need to be the top seed in the Eastern Conference. And as they enter play on Monday, the Cavs have a 4.5 game lead over the Boston Celtics for that top seed. Those two teams have played twice so far this season. They've split those matchups. They've got 2 more of those matchups, one of which is coming up a week from tomorrow, which will be a very big game. And then the other game is at the end of February in Boston. So the tiebreaker is still up for grabs there. And the Cavs have what is considered to be a sizable lead right now. And I don't think Boston's going to go away. I think Boston has better days ahead of it, just the way that Cleveland has better days ahead of it this season. They're going to improve upon what they've been, and I think the Cavs will too. But I think for this regular season to be successful, it's not about the record. It's about setting yourself up for the most playoff success that you could possibly achieve. And for the Cavs to do that, I think it's really important that they're beginning every series they can inside Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse in Cleveland, Ohio. And I think it's important that any game 7 they could potentially play is inside Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse in Cleveland, Ohio. I think those things are vital to the success of the Cavs in the postseason. And I do still think that this is a team that is built to have some serious postseason success because of the way their offense operates. Like teams that are as elite as they are on that end of the floor tend to be really good, right? That doesn't take a scientist to figure out. I think that there's a lot more they can tap into defensively. Now, I do think on that end of the floor, I'm hesitant to say they're at rock bottom because I kind of felt that way after the Philadelphia game on Friday night. And then you saw Saturday, I thought things were even worse on that end of the floor. So I'm not going to say they're at rock bottom, but it's hard for me to imagine it getting much worse than where it's at right now for the Cavs defensively. I think that they will rebound there, but ultimately I think that the way you should look at this team is, do they finish the regular season with more wins than the Boston Celtics? That's the bar, because you want to be the 1 seed. You want to have the easiest path. And it's not just about starting off every postseason series at home. It's also about the path to the NBA Finals, right? When you get to the finals, you're most likely going to see OKC. I think there are very few teams in the West that are capable of beating Oklahoma City. But I do think that there are 3 teams right now in the Eastern Conference that I view as capable of winning the NBA Finals this year. I think the Cavs are capable of it. I think Boston is capable of it. And I think the New York Knicks are capable of it. Now, as I'm sitting here recording this late Sunday night, all the games are over, so these standings are not going to change. Cavs have a 4.5 game lead on Boston for first place in the East. They are 6.5 games better than the New York Knicks for third place in the East. Knicks are in third. Celtics are in second, obviously. The Milwaukee Bucks are in fourth. They're 10 games behind the Cavs. Nothing could happen that the Bucks are going to jump up there. And it is really difficult considering the directions that these teams are trending right now and just the way I believe in these teams. It's hard for me to see a team. It's hard for me to see the top 3 being anything other than a combination, and I believe it will be likely the way it is right now. But it's hard for me to see a team other than Cleveland, Boston, and New York slipping into the top 3 at the end of the season. So that means when the postseason arrives, you look at the path. Okay, the Cavs, let's just say they hang on to the 1 seed, which I do believe is the most likely scenario here. You're going to be facing a team in the play-in. You're going to be facing 7, 8, 9, or 10 in the first round. You'll be heavily favored to win that series. Second round, you're going to get the 4-5 matchup. Would you rather face the winner of Milwaukee, Indiana, maybe Detroit gets up there? I don't know what those are going to look like. Or would you rather face the New York Knicks in the second round? Because I think that answer is easy. Yeah, the Milwaukee Bucks have the best player in the conference in Giannis Antetokounmpo, but that team is not a team that I believe is really built for the postseason. I don't think that the Bucks could guard the Cavs, and I just think even if the Cavs don't have their defense figured out, I think Cleveland would really be able to outscore Milwaukee in that type of series. And that type of series, I think, only happens if the Cavs get the 1 seed. So for this to be a successful regular season, it's not about breaking the franchise record for wins in a season of 66. It's not about winning 65 plus games. I do think they will win 60 plus games. I just think that this team has too much talent. I think they've won too many games already. And I think they will figure out things defensively, particularly after the All-Star break. I look at that and say, okay, the Cavs are going to start rolling again there. But I think they're in a rough patch. And I don't think that this rough patch is worth overreacting to. It's worth reacting to. I think there are things that are worth being concerned about, particularly the defensive end of the floor. As I've mentioned on this podcast for several days in a row now, that is the number one thing that concerns me about this team, is what they have been defensively, and they're not building the proper habits on that end of the floor. But in the same breath, I do think that they're not going to be this bad defensively for the rest of the season. They're not going to be one of the worst teams on defense the rest of the way. That's just not who the Cavs are going to be, while still remaining elite offensively. Like, they just don't slip up from being number one, even despite the fact that they're having to face off against set defenses so frequently because they can't get stops on the other end. They're still just absolutely torching teams. Like what they did on Saturday night against Houston offensively was super impressive, because the Rockets are the number 3 defense in the NBA. The Rockets scored at will and had a set defense, and the Cavs just absolutely torched them all night. And they scored 47 points in the fourth quarter. That's unheard of against the top 5 defensive unit, especially when the game's on the line the way it was. So I'm really confident in this offense, and I do think that the Cavs defense will bounce back. I don't know that it's ever going to be elite, And if it's not elite, it's not being maximized because they have Evan Mobley. They've got, when Dean Wade is healthy and out there, they've got Jared Allen. Like, they have a lot of really, really good defensive players. And it not being an elite defense, I think, is sort of leaving a little bit to be desired. But I do think that they're not going to be bad either. I think that they will figure this out. I think they're exhausted. I think when they get to the All-Star break, when they get past the All-Star break, things are going to look better. Now, is this team going to change? Got a lot of questions about, whether or not the Cavs are going to make a trade, and one about the luxury tax that I want to talk about, because that is an important thing. It's something that interests me, and it's something that you should care about as a Cavs fan. So we'll do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket RX. If you are ready to boost your confidence and take control in the bedroom, Rocket RX has the solution. Imagine feeling more prepared and performing at your best. Rocket RX makes it simple and stress-free. Rocket RX offers FDA-approved treatments for erectile dysfunction at a lower cost than branded alternatives. No more uncomfortable doctor visits or pharmacy trips. Everything is delivered straight to your door. Discreet, plain packaging. With Rocket RX, you'll get trusted care from a real U.S. clinical team, complete a quick 100% online consultation, and you could get your free prescription today. Visit rocketrx.com to get started now. It only takes 2 minutes, not very long. Right now, our listeners can get 40% off your first order when you use code LOCKEDONNBA. That's Rocket RX, code LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off your first order. Again, rocketrx.com, code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off your first order. Terms and conditions do apply. Rocket RX, better sex made simple. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Be a friend, tell a friend. Friends don't let friends not be subscribed to Locked On Cavs. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed. And there have been people that have been asking about whether or not the Cavs are a team that is willing to pay the luxury tax. And they, as things stand right now, the Cavs are $1.8 million approximately. It's a shade over that, but for all intents and purposes, $1.8 million above the luxury tax line. And when you are above the luxury tax line, you obviously have to pay penalties. And the Cavs are, from what I know, the Cavs are willing to do that. This is a team that in Dan Gilbert in the past, when the Cavs have been a championship caliber team, Dan Gilbert has had no issues paying the luxury tax. At times, they have been an incredibly expensive team. Dan has not wasted money in terms of, he has not wasted opportunities. He has spent money. That's a better way to word that. He has spent the money when it's been the proper time to do so. It doesn't make sense to spend the luxury tax when you're a team that's winning 19 games a year and you're rebuilding, but when you're a team that is on pace to win 60 plus games and compete for an NBA championship this year, it makes sense to spend into the luxury tax. Now, what complicates things is that the Cavs are only $1.8 million over the tax. When a team is in that area, like take New Orleans, for example, the New Orleans Pelicans, obviously the season has, I think it's fair to say, not gone according to plan down in New Orleans. They've been a team that has been hit with a ton of injuries. It's been just not a great time for them. So you look at them as a team, okay, well, let's look at their tax situation because they are a team that has been expensive, despite the fact that they've not won at the level you would anticipate them winning at, right? The roster is really good. They came into the season with expectations. They came into the season as a tax team, right? Well, they're only a little bit over the tax, just the same way that the Cavs are only a little bit over the tax. And when you are like that, you want to make a move to get under the tax. And it's easier for a team like New Orleans to do that because they can trade away a player and it's not going to affect whether or not they make the playoffs because they have got off to such a bad start that they're going to be a team that misses the playoffs anyways. And when that happens, you want to duck the tax, right? That's what it's called. It's called ducking the tax. The Cavs, on the other hand, so the Pelicans are going to drop below the tax. That's what will happen. They're around $2 million, I believe, above the tax. They will trade somebody away. They might have to attach a second round pick or something like that. They will trade somebody away and then they will end up under the tax and they won't have to pay it and everything will be fine and dandy there. But I don't believe that's going to happen with the Cavs, because could the Cavs make a trade? Could they trade George Niang for somebody that's a couple $1 million cheaper and get under the tax, but really not improve the team? Sure, that could happen. I would not anticipate that happening. I don't think that this team wants to trade George Niang. Could they trade Karis LeVert for somebody that is cheaper than what Karis LeVert makes? Yeah, they could. I don't anticipate that happening. I'm not saying that that can't happen, but as of now, I don't believe that's going to be the course that the Cavs take. I do think that they're willing to pay the tax. Now, with the tax, it's sort of like jumping into a cold swimming pool, right? Maybe it's a nice summer day out and you want to go for a refreshing dip, but the pool's a little chilly. What's the best way of getting in? Do you want to jump in, or do you want to just dip your toe in and test the waters? Now, dipping your toe in and testing the water might be something that's a little bit painful. You're kind of not all in on the situation. It's not the most pleasant experience, where if you jump in the pool, you're in. There's no doubt about being in it. Right now, the Cavs are kind of dipping their toe in the luxury tax because they're only over it by that $1.8 million. And they are a team that is going to be paying the luxury tax for the next several years. I mean, you can look at their cap sheet right now. For next season, they are $4.5 million over the projected salary cap, or over the projected tax line. And they only have 10 players under contract, because Ty Jerome's not under contract. He doesn't count there. Karis LeVert's not under contract. He doesn't count there. So Tristan Thompson, another one, doesn't count there because he's not under contract. Sam Merrill, I believe, also not under contract. He doesn't count there. So that's kind of how you get to, the full Cavs roster right now. They're going to be in the tax. And what happens is eventually the tax costs more and more and more and more the longer you are in the tax. The more time you spend in the tax, and you start having to deal with repeater penalties. You have to pay more for the tax. So it is a smaller amount. I don't think it's dollar for dollar right now. I think it's like 1.25 per dollar when you are in the tax the first time. But when you are in it 3 out of 4 years, that penalty goes up, and it costs so much more money to be in the tax. So that's why teams don't want to be just barely in the tax. They want to be a team that is, the first time you're in the tax, you want to be all in. You want to make no doubt about it. You don't want to be a team that's in the same position that the Cavs are in right now, where you're barely across that line. But the Cavs are also in a unique spot, because if you look up and down this roster at all of the guys that you could conceivably trade away to slide under that salary tax line, George Niang contributes to this team, is beloved in that locker room. Karis LeVert is a big part of this team. I think we have really seen over the last week or so Karis LeVert's impact, particularly on the defensive end, with what he does there and how much the Cavs miss him. Isaac Okoro is a big deal to this team, is beloved in that locker room. Like, those are the guys that you look at. Dean Wade is irreplaceable on this team. You look at those guys as potential candidates because of their salaries, to say, okay, the Cavs could trade that guy and slide under the tax. If they could find a player that is similarly skilled, similar impact as that player, but makes $2 million less, and you attach a second-round pick, you could get under that tax. That could be how it works. I don't think the Cavs want to break up this locker room. I don't think that's something they want to do. And then you look at some of the other players that maybe you could trade, like a Tristan Thompson, who doesn't have a huge impact on the floor. He has a ginormous impact off the floor, and the Cavs are not going to trade Tristan Thompson. But he doesn't make enough money to really make an impact on that, because you have to take something back. And that's not enough of a gap there because of what his salary number is to get under the tax. The same thing can be said for Sam Merrill. Like, the Cavs are in a bit of a predicament, because everybody that they could trade to slide under means a lot in the locker room and means a lot on the floor to a team that's really good. This team is championship caliber. I think they're a team that is worth paying the tax for. It's a really unique situation how many guys they have contributing to this roster. I don't think they have a bad contract on the books, and sometimes that can be a bit of a negative thing. I think the way the Cavs have structured their salaries is really smart. I think it's been really good work by Kobe Altman, but it's also landed them in this predicament because everybody they have so far this year has been pretty good, or the guys that maybe don't make as much of an impact aren't making enough money to really move the needle on the tax line. So, long story short, I do believe the Cavs are going to pay the tax this year. I think that's going to be the route that goes, and I would not be surprised to see them stand pat at this trade deadline. It would not shock me if they don't add anything. It would not shock me if they don't subtract anything either. This is a team that I believe is championship caliber. I think the Cavs believe is championship caliber. And sometimes you just don't want to break that up. And I think that's kind of where we're at with the Cavs. And I don't think that they're going to give away an important piece of this team for the sole purpose of ducking the tax line. I don't think that's what is on the agenda for the Cavs. Well, the agenda for the Cavs before the All-Star break is tough. We're going to talk about the next 9 games they have before certain members of the team will head off to San Francisco for the All-Star break. We'll do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show on YouTube. If you're watching right now, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, hit that notification bell, because there's another edition of Locked On Cavs coming your way at noon today. The Locked On Cavs Whip Around Show, going to be up, talked to Wes Goldberg, covers the Miami Heat, talked to Kuka Hill, does a great job covering the Detroit Pistons, and of course, talked to our guy Brad Rowland about the Atlanta Hawks, who the Cavs will see all 3 of those teams this week. And that is part of the upcoming schedule. And the Cavs don't have it easy before they depart for the All-Star break. Their final game before the All-Star break is February 12th in Toronto. Between now and then, they've got 8 other games. Starting tonight against the Detroit Pistons. The Pistons, of course, not a pushover. They've been playing great basketball under JB Bickerstaff. I really talked about that in depth with Koo coming up on the second edition, the Whip Around edition of Locked On Cavs today. You're not going to want to miss that. But, they have a lot of tough games. So of the 9 games that they have left this first half, technically, I guess, of the season, even though we're past the halfway mark, but before the All-Star break, of the 9 games they have remaining, 7 of them are coming against teams that are in the playoff picture. And you might say, okay, well, a couple of those games are against teams that are in the play-in, like Miami, who they played this week. That's a team that's in the play-in. Atlanta, they're 9th. Well, let's look at that. The Cavs almost never win in Miami, I think, since the Miami Heat have existed, which is, dating back to the 90s. The Cavs have won 16 times in Miami, and they typically play there twice a year. So not great odds there as far as that goes. We've already seen them lose twice to Atlanta. That is a tough back-to-back, too. You go from Miami on Wednesday night back home to Cleveland against Atlanta on Thursday night, an Atlanta team that is not on a back-to-back. That's a tough ask, right? So those 2 teams are in the play-in picture. Dallas, another team that the Cavs played before the All-Star break, that's another team in the play-in picture, but they are extremely beat up. If Kyrie Irving plays in that game, that Maverick squad looks formidable. If he doesn't, and even then, because they've got a lot of bigs that are out right now, I think that could be a really tough matchup for Dallas, and the Cavs should be able to have their way with that Mavericks team. But they've got some tough games. And then the only 2 other games that they have before the break that are not against teams in the postseason picture right now are Washington, which the Wizards have no interest in winning any games, and Toronto, who is sneakily not playing bad basketball right now. The Raptors have not been a terrible team. They're not a good team, but they're not a terrible team. What the Cavs do have going for them is 5 of their next 9 are at home. I do think it deserves mentioning, and I know no one wants to hear that this team is tired because they're professional athletes and, they fly on chartered planes, and I get all that, but it is true too. Like, it's not lying to you when I say, yeah, this team looks exhausted right now. The fact that they were essentially on the road for 2 straight weeks did not help. I think it'll be a really good thing for this team to be able to spend some time at home before the All-Star break. So they play at home, obviously, tonight against Detroit. They'll fly to Miami on Tuesday, but then they're home for their game Thursday against the Hawks. They play again on Sunday against the Mavericks. They play at home against Boston on Tuesday. So they'll be home for a little while here. And that, I think, is something that's really important. And then even their away games, like at Detroit, that's a super easy flight. It's the second of back-to-back, but that's not a tough road trip. And then Washington is one of the other away games. So they do get a little bit of a break there. Toronto is never fun to go to, but that's the last game before the break. And I just think that is something that the Cavs need to spend some time at home. And I do think that this stretch, while it's tough, the opponents are tough, it's not going to be easy. They're a team that I think wants to get to the All-Star break. And I don't think you can blame them with how good their first half has been. I think that they've expended a lot of energy to make it so. And a week off will do them really well when that time does get here. But that All-Star break is not here yet. They have to play these 9 games, and they have to do well in these 9 games. Like that game against Boston is a really big one. That's a really important game. if they can find a way to win that game, I think everyone should feel really good about them finishing as the top seed in the Eastern Conference. If they don't win that game, it doesn't mean, they're not going to be, but it's something to worth monitoring. So how this team looks over the next couple of weeks, I think is an important thing to monitor. It's not an easy stretch of schedule, but I do think that it's a little bit easier than what they just went through because they will be spending some time at home. Like when they came home, I talked to some guys last night in the locker room. They got home from Minnesota early in the morning after that game back on, what was that? January 18th. They got home real early in the morning. They played Monday at 3:30 and then left for Houston after the game. They were basically in Cleveland for 36 hours in 2 weeks. And that's a tough thing to handle. And I think that more time at home will be something that's good for this team and something that they need. Something that is good for you is making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. I appreciate you if you do that. I appreciate you if you don't, but I would like if you did. So find us anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Friends don't let friends not be subscribed to Locked On Cavs. And if you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs. I will be back tomorrow talking about the Cavs taking on Detroit, but the Whip Around episode coming your way at noon first.